what you have currently had. And those instruments.
Starting. Have you opened? Members of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and friends. On COVID-19, the objective of this virtual interface is to synergize the collective effort of all stakeholders for fighting the killer virus, which has taken away lives of thousands, infected millions of people, disrupted supply chains, which can cause losses worth several trillions dollars globally. Back in India, also, we are faced with a gigantic challenge of meeting the healthcare demand in various states, particularly at identified COVID-19 hotspots, finding resources to meet the financial challenges caused by the pandemic, restoring the supply chain, which has come to a grinding halt. All stakeholders, government, industry, labor, and civil society have to work together to bail us out from the present predicament. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to just tell you briefly about our chamber, Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, started 51 years back, and we are the only bilateral chamber between India and US, and we have 12 regions and lots of members across these 12 chapters, and we're expanding membership across India and in US, other countries also. At this time, we all want to come together and appreciate the bold steps taken by our Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi, for responding to the situation in an immediate manner, where we are able to confront this very well. This teleconference is having participation from all our members and across the country, and also a lot of friends. And now I would like to introduce our eminent speaker. We have with us Mr. Parvathineni Harish, Additional Secretary, Economic Relations, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, as the speaker. Sir, we are extremely thankful to you for sparing your time to be present at this virtual interface. We've been discussing the impact of the COVID-19 at various forums and creating ideations to help the governments at the center and states to respond to the situation and to catalyze the collective effort of the business community. We would like to convey through you, sir, that our chamber will work with you according to whatever you tell us to do in the times to come. And Mr. Harish is now the head of Division of Economic Diplomacy and States Division that deals with bilateral economic relations of India with other countries and liaises in this regard with all 9 economic ministries of the Government of India and state governments and union territories. He also supervises the multilateral economic relations division that handles G20, BRICS, IBSA, and etc. He joined IFS in 1990, and Mr. Harish has held many eminent positions, including being ambassador to Vietnam, Consul General of India in Houston, Joint Secretary to the Honorable President of India, and has served in many other international missions and policy-related affairs. He has had a brilliant academic career. He was a gold medalist in mechanical engineering from Usmania University, and I am Calcutta graduate and a distinction in Arabic from America University of Cairo. He has been appointed by the Honorable Prime Minister to a special committee to deal with COVID situation as a quick responsive team to tackle this emergency. He is a member of Empowered Group to manage the industry associations, private sector, NGOs, and also international organizations, which is very important for us to know. And this is where we would like to know where we stand and what the future holds for us and how government is working along to get us out of this system and to go ahead. We would like to look at it as a very positive future because that is how the government has been working together tirelessly. And sir, we are all with you and we are waiting to hear from you. And once again, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, madam, for your kind introduction. At the outset, I want to thank the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and you, madam, personally for inviting me to have this virtual interaction with your distinguished membership. Friends who have joined us today in this virtual meeting, I want to thank you for sparing your time and for being part of this interaction. I have always had the pleasure of, in my earlier postings, of interacting with the Chamber when they led delegations earlier during my stint as Consul General in Houston. And in my current capacity as Additional Secretary dealing with economic relations, I've also had the pleasure of interacting with the Chamber. I thank you for giving me this opportunity to meet you virtually and to have this discussion. I will go through with the presentation, and once the presentation is over, I'll be happy to take questions and to discuss some of the issues that are of interest to you. Can we go to the first slide, Manish, after this? Friends, as we can see, this is an unprecedented global crisis that we are facing in terms of this pandemic. The pandemic is likely to drive down global GDP significantly, causing huge losses running into trillions of dollars, cause, of course, shrinking in the investments at a global level, a significant capital flight from emerging markets, as you can see. And there has been a crash in the price of oil, so the destabilization in the energy markets. The crisis, the pandemic began from China, and there's been a slowdown in China's economy. But again, as compared to the previous outbreak of a pandemic when SARS happened in 2003, China makes a significant chunk of the global GDP now as compared to them. So its impact at the global level will also be that much more. It's disrupting manufacturing supply chains and sharply curtail energy and commodity demand. I think there will be not just actual shrinking, not just in the US, but probably in much of Europe. Of course, these are estimates as we speak. And I think some of the hardest hit sectors you can see will be in automobiles, aviation, tourism, hospitality, transport, agri. But again, as I said, we will address some of these issues about what are the sectors that are more likely to be hit. I think at a time when social distancing is a norm, any industry that is dependent on social proximity will, of course, see the most significant hit. And that is something which will include, of course, hospitality, it will include tourism, it will include transport, aviation, and these are the sectors that will take a big hit. In terms of the projected economic impact on India, I think for us, the most important challenge from a human point of view is to control the spread of the disease, to limit the economic impact of the outbreak and the lockdown. We can see, of course, that there are significant downside risks. There is, of course, a global slowdown, and supply chain disruptions are everywhere. I think the only silver lining we can see from our point of view is that we are dependent on hydrocarbons imports for most of our requirements. There is a significant fall in the international crude oil prices. We can hope for an early containment of COVID, and then the monetary and fiscal measures announced by the Government of India and by governments worldwide will try to address the slowdown. Sectors that are highly dependent on imports from China will feel much greater impact, including pharma, which are dependent on APIs significantly from China, textiles, and apparel sector, the automotive sector, electrical machinery. I think as compared to many countries, the import component of our overall gross manufacturing exports is lower. So as compared to many other economies, probably at a relative level, the impact in the manufacturing sector on us is much lower. There would be stress on banking and financial sectors, and of course, the destruction of global demand and to an extent domestic demand will have an impact. But as I said, the silver lining is lowered oil prices. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next? Yeah, thanks. I think in terms of the economic stimulus, the government of India has announced, of course, 1.7 trillion rupee package announced by the finance minister late last month. Focuses on cash transfers and ensuring food security. I think the PM Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, the 5 kg of rice or wheat per month free of cost to be made available, expected to benefit over 800 million people, poor people in the country. The cash transfer scheme of 2,000 rupees under the PM Kisan Yojana will be front-loaded and paid to 87 million farmers. The government has announced a medical insurance cover for healthcare staff who are at the front line fighting the pandemic. The Narega wages have been increased, will benefit over 50 million families. The beneficiaries of Ujjwala scheme will get free LPG cylinders for the next 3 months. Self-help groups, and this is a big initiative to help self-help groups, especially women-focused self-help groups, which will get up to rupees 10 lakh collateral-free loans, and states can also utilize almost 31,000 crores that is there in the Building and Construction Workers Fund, and this will benefit millions of our workers. The Government of India has also said it will pay the EPF contribution for both employees and employers for the next 3 months. So I think this is part of the economic stimulus package announced. Next slide, please. Liquidity will always be a significant issue. The RBI has announced many measures that would inject liquidity into the economy, provide relief. Moratorium on payment of installments. This is playing itself out. Commercial banks have already brought out necessary circulars in terms of implementing the moratorium. There has been a slashing of the repo rate. Liquidity constraints have been eased. And the deadline for realization and repatriation for export proceeds has been increased by another 6 months. I think a lot of these measures are intended to address liquidity constraints, of course, which many in the business and industry are aware and I'm sure will face and will highlight to policymakers in the future. Next slide, please. I think this is an important aspect. Agricultural support, the government is aware that we are now in the harvesting season to be immediately followed thereafter by a new crop sowing season. There is a significant focus to ensure that the harvesting season goes on in a more coordinated fashion despite the lockdown, and that there are necessary facilities made available for storage and for wherever there are export commitments in terms of fruit exports, for example, mangoes from certain parts of the country, those export commitments are kept. I think the government has focused on having new features of the National Agricultural Market, the ENAM platform, to make it more user-friendly. You can see some of the on your screens, basically in terms of facilitating mobile payment facilities, enhanced features on mobile app for gate entries and payment through mobiles, and integration of farmers' database in the ENAM website. There is also an easing in agri-produce sale rules. The jurisdiction of the mandis, the APMCs, has been limited to their physical premises. The government has allowed big retailers and commodity processors to buy directly from the farmers. Likewise, the passes for movement of essential goods and the critical persons engaged has been decentralized. The focus is also on facilitating procurement of pulses from farmers, and so agri is a focus area as we go into this period of lockdown, and we see probably even in the future, this will continue to be a significant focus of government effort. Next slide, please. I think the Prime Minister has set up 11 empowered groups as quick response teams under the Disaster Management Act to tackle the overall COVID outbreak in the country. These empowered groups are headed by secretaries, and they deal with various issues. Some empowered groups are dealing with hospital equipment and hospital supplies. Other empowered groups are dealing with economy, like for example, Empowered Group 6, of which I am a member, has been constituted under the chairmanship of the CEO of Niti Aayog. And it includes a principal scientific advisor and various other members, including the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Home Affairs and other organizations. This particular empowered group is tasked with dealing with international organizations, civil society organizations and NGOs in the private sector, including industry associations like yourself. So the idea is that these empowered groups will tackle as quick response teams various issues that would emerge in various sectors. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide, Manish? The Empowered Group 6 has had detailed meetings with various UN organizations, WHO, UNICEF, the World Bank, the FAO, the ADB, the UNICEF, on various aspects of their operations in India. It has held already it has sent out messages to over 10,000 NGOs that have been registered with the Darpan portal of the government, where these NGOs are registered to seek their cooperation in addressing various aspects of the lockdown and what they expect from the government in terms of facilitation of their work in this period. There have been a number of cross-sectoral dialogues with the private sector, including with the CII and with FICCI, with NASSCOM, on various aspects of business and industry, their operations, what they expect the government to do in this period of the lockdown, and what kind of facilitation they need from the government. There is also a specific focus in terms of cross-linking with Empowered Group 3 on procurement, or Empowered Group 5 on logistics. For example, in terms of how some of our industries are getting into specific aspects of developing ventilators, getting the necessary approval from regulators for their use, for production of personal protection equipment, and what more can be done in terms of procuring these PPEs in a phased manner. Many of our industries are moving into this, and this is something which is not unique to India. Even in a place like China, for example, China Petroleum, for example, was producing personal protection equipment. A lot of the auto companies were producing ventilators. So I think as part of the national effort in various countries, and it happened in the US, I think a lot of the industries are addressing immediate national needs in terms of addressing the pandemic by producing things that are required with the facilities and with the capabilities that they already have. Next slide, please. Manish, can we have the next slide? I want to focus a little bit more on this particular section. I think there is no doubt that this pandemic is probably once in a lifetime occurrence. It's a black swan event, completely unexpected. Of course, there are challenges for the nation as a whole, for our people, but it's also, of course, challenge for the business and industry. But it also opens up potential economic opportunities for us. I think the steep decline in oil prices is a positive, but again, the decline in oil prices is happening because of destruction of demand. So I think that is something, while it will help our fiscal position, I think we need to do something more to kickstart our economy. What we also see is that the Digital India initiative of the government has laid enough groundwork. And now, as we move to contactless methods of delivery of services, building on the infrastructure we have so far and on the Digital India initiative, there could be a significant leg up for e-commerce players, for retailers, and for contactless methods of delivery of services. Likewise, there could be a significant focus on the agri sector, we feel, including on the frozen instant food industry chain in the food and beverage sector. But building supply chain resilience is key. This is to ensure that there is enough elasticity helping to return to original state of business quickly. I think building this resilience is very important, and it will require restructuring of the internal working of businesses and their wider networks. Next slide, Manish. What I wanted to emphasize here is that even before the pandemic hit, I think what we have seen is that because of the US-China trade dispute, various multinational companies were looking at diversifying their value chains. They were looking at having possible attractive alternate destinations for their operations. As part of this, the Ministry of External Affairs, the DPIIT, and other line ministries were keenly formulating a strategy to see how best we can position India as an attractive alternate destination for global manufacturing companies to diversify their investments and operations. And I think this was based on studying the investment climate in other countries that were also seeking to attract such investments, and matching some of the incentives that they were giving to investments. I think this was something which has preceded the outbreak of the pandemic by many months, and this is something which the government was keenly focusing on as a whole of government effort, involving line economic ministries in Delhi and various Indian embassies, missions abroad. I think the other issue is also that this particular pandemic also highlights the need for diversification of imports of Indian business and industry, so that there is an excessive reliance on one particular country or source of imports for their intermediate goods and even for basic goods. I think if you look at it in the case of certain industries like pharmaceuticals, while we have a robust industry, the excessive reliance on the active pharmaceutical ingredients imported from China has been brought into sharp relief as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. For some of the medicines, we found that we did have enough stock, but the excessive reliance on one country or one source of imports for basic raw material for the pharma industry was certainly a risk. And I think this going forward, this will be something where a significant focus will be there. I think for certain key sectors, the focus going forward is to ensure that the entire value chain is located within the country. And I think the government has set aside 10,000 crores for shifting entire manufacturing value chains for pharmaceuticals so that even the APIs are produced in India. And I think this is an opportunity, and this is something which we will require in terms of our overall health security. The government will also create a production-linked incentive scheme for the promotion of domestic manufacturing of these critical drug intermediates and APIs within the country. Manish, next slide, please. I think going forward, not just in India, but probably around the world, there will be a relook at the entire health sector in terms of infrastructure, in terms of human resources, and what more needs to be done to strengthen it. I think what we see is that our hospital beds to population ratio, physicians to population ratio, etc., needs a significant shoring up. I think there is going to be a significant focus on improving health infrastructure in India and of boosting the human resources that the health sector would require. It will also mean that there's going to be a focus on healthcare equipment, not just ventilators, but the whole range of equipment and supplies that it would need, including PPEs and even things like sanitizers. I think in all likelihood, in India and in other countries, you will see the baseline for health infrastructure, for human resources, and for supplies will improve. And this is something I think which business and industry will look at, and this can be a significant opportunity. I think for us, this will mean that this will not only cater to the domestic demand, but this will also cater significantly to export opportunities in the medium to long term. And I think that's how business and industry needs to look at it. Next slide, Manish. So I think broadly speaking, yes, this is a challenge, and but this is also a challenge that throws up opportunities. This is an opportunity for us to probably redo some of the value chains of which we were not a part, and to see how best we can benefit from creating or being part of new value chains. Agriculture will be a focus area. I think pharma and health sectors will be key focus areas. And I think what would be required is also to see how innovatively businesses can adapt and build greater resilience in their systems to tackle this. For those businesses that are reliant on social proximity, it is a particular challenge, but then how to innovatively deliver contactless services will be the key to build such resilience in their systems. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and I'll be very happy to take questions and to have a discussion. I'm unable to hear Madam Rajalakshmi Rao, but what I can see is that there are a lot of questions that I can see coming in. And I can take some of the questions if that is okay, but I am unable to hear you. Maybe there's a technical issue at your end. I also want to take the opportunity to welcome some members of the chamber, etc., who have joined from Houston, especially Mr. Jagdeep Ahluwalia, who has also joined in from there. In terms of the questions that I can see here, I think there is a few questions that people have about reduction of salaries or layoffs. I think the government has given an advisory to the companies that during the period of the lockdown, they may not lay off their workers. And I think that is the advisory from the Ministry of Labor. But yes, I think this is a tough time for all of us to be able to deal with this. And I think this is something we need to go through it together as a country and, of course, as businesses. There is a question whether organizations like IACC can contribute to the the task force. I would certainly request IACC and its leadership to ascertain the views of its members on various aspects of business and industry and communicate it to the chair of the Empowered Group number 6 that deals with the private sector, which is the CEO of Niti Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant. And I'm sure all your views and your suggestions will be fully considered. I think there's also a question about cybersecurity related issues as companies increasingly go into contactless mode. I think this is an issue. This remained an issue before the COVID crisis. This continues to remain an issue, and I think all organizations must ensure that they foolproof their businesses from the point of view of cybersecurity. I think that's very important, and that's something which should continue to remain the focus of business and industry in this regard. Unemployment is an issue. There's a question someone has, I think Mr. Rati has said about the ILO report where it is mentioned that 40 crore Indians will be unemployed. We don't have the figures. There are various figures being given by ILO, some by some of the Indian think tanks. I haven't seen a government figure on this, but yes, job losses are expected. And of course, it's a lockdown and migrant labor have moved away, many of them from the places where they were working. So this will continue to be a focus area, I think, and the government is fully aware of it. And some of the policy initiatives are to immediately alleviate the distress of people who are no longer employed. And of course, as various states assess state-specific strategies to address how, in a phased manner, some of the business and industry can come on stream. I think then this is something which you should point out to the state governments wherever you are, and how you can have business practices in your industries which will be in tune with social distancing and which will enable you to go on stream so that people are employed and your business operations can go on and your contractual commitments and your export commitments can be there. There's also a question about whether there's any hassle-free wheat procurement in Punjab and in other states. Sir, I'm not aware about whether there have been, of course, this is a lockdown, but I can assure you that both the central government and the various state governments are committed to addressing the harvesting season and the issues associated therein. And again, this is where we believe India is a union of states and state governments, and in fact, I would say the district administrations have a very important role to play as they work in bringing and facilitating harvesting and storage of the harvest, and thereafter to facilitate the sowing season that is coming on. So I think this will be an important an important focus area for state and district administrations. There's a question about where the opportunities are besides pharmaceuticals. I think I just gave pharmaceuticals as an example, but I think every industry, it all depends upon how innovatively you can leverage to create new value chains where we were not part of earlier, and how this gives an opportunity to engage with industries in various sectors who want to have an additional manufacturing presence in India, and what is it we can do to engage such global business and to be part of or recreate or create new value chains. I think that should be the focus. So it's not limited to one sector alone, but this is something that extends to various sectors. I think there are also, I can see some questions about whether government will assist businesses, or whether government will waive interest on overdrafts during the lockdown period. I think on term loans, the RBI has already talked about, has announced certain measures. The finance minister has said certainly the government will come up with additional measures to help business and industry in distress. So I think we should wait for that. But I think this is something, but if there are specific issues relating to specific businesses, I think these should be brought to the notice of the empowered group number 6 so that those issues can be addressed. We have had instances where, for example, those were companies that were in the export of certain equipment which were meeting, say, the standards of, in the case of masks, standards of Europe were not, could not export, but their standards were not meant for the Indian market either. So some of those issues were addressed to see that how best they could be assisted, because if they couldn't export, but the same equipment could be used or supplies could be used within India, what is it we can do from a regulatory point of view to quickly get the necessary approval so that it can be used within India? I think there are, I can also see a few questions about the lockdown period, whether the government a lot of people are gathering in cinemas, festivities, malls, but will you allow manufacturing to run with social distancing norms? Absolutely. This is exactly what I said. Mr. Rahul Singh has asked this question. I think it is for the business and industry to communicate to state governments how they can resume their operations in a manner that respects social distancing norms. And I think this is where the chamber has an important role to play in taking your views across and communicating it so that jobs are not lost, your export and other contractual commitments can be maintained. And but I think we should take it as a given that social distancing for the at least short to medium term will continue to remain. So how do you meet those social distancing norms and still run your operations will be the challenge for business and industry. There's a question on the education sector and education delivery methods. I think this is a very important question. I think our children in schools, universities have been impacted by this, as all other sectors are. I think on this, I can say that the Ministry of HRD has already an excellent platform which they have created for tele-education, which brings together all teachers in the country, where all textbooks issued by all states and the CBSE and the NCERT are all online, and they have energized textbooks with QR codes at the end of each chapter. And all a student has to do is to scan the QR code, and they are taken to online available material, which adds value to what is the information that's already there in the textbook. So, and this excellent platform is an open source Sunbird platform, which has been developed by the MHRD. I think this is a great platform, and I think, as I said, the government's digital initiatives and the various national digital platforms and e-governance platforms that have been put in place during the last few years, I think we actually see the value of those now at a time like this, because now we are in a position to leverage the launch of these digital and e-governance platforms at this stage. And we are actually seeing what kind of an impact they are able to make. There is a question about labor-intensive manufacturing and whether the focus should be. I think yes, labor-intensive manufacturing can be the focus as long as industry can continue to ensure that social distancing can be maintained and social distancing norms can be maintained, so that the concerns of the pandemic, which will continue for a couple of months, will be met. So I think being labor intensive is not a negative trait, as long as companies can ensure that hygiene norms and social distancing norms can be maintained, health screenings can be done. And I think this is something which all business and industry will have to invest in to ensure that their systems and processes for health screening, for hygiene, and for social distancing are incorporated. And then these systems and what plan they have to ensure that these are maintained, if they can be communicated to district administrations and to state administrations, I think that is when we can have a much better outcome that we all wish. I think there's a question whether we negotiate with the US on H-1Bs. Again, I think this is something the US is dealing with the pandemic at this stage on various aspects of the visa policies. The government is in touch with the US government. And I think while right now all the energies of both the governments are focused on dealing with the pandemic, it will come up at some stage. Madam Rajalakshmi Rao, I can't see any more questions I have missed in this. I'm unable to hear you, madam. There's also a question about whether any further information is there on the other EGs. I think the other empowered groups are working on various aspects. Some of them are working on procurement of PPEs and ventilators. Some of them are working on logistics issues. Some of them are working on communication issues, how best we can address the communication requirements during the time of a pandemic in terms of taking the message across. So I think these are most of the other things are of course online and they're available. But I think I just wanted to say that they are dealing with various aspects of dealing with the pandemic. What impacts can we see on the real estate sector? I'm not a focused, I mean, I don't have domain expertise specifically on the real estate sector, but like other sectors, this is something which will have an impact. I can't comment as someone with the domain expertise in this. There's a question whether how other infectious diseases like TB will get affected, since all healthcare providers are busy with COVID. I think to the extent possible, the government's focus is on ensuring there are separate COVID hospitals at every level, so that the various COVID hospitals can deal with the cases coming from dealing with COVID. And until the lockdown period is over, access to OPDs is a problem. But those who are hospitalized or those who need essential medicines, they will continue to have medicines. I think the PMJAY is very active. The Ayushman Bharat program is active, and wherever those who have insurance cover under Ayushman Bharat are having access to medicines, and they are having access to the various other services under the scheme. I think there is a question about training being planned to deal and when we can benefit from this. I think one of the important issues in dealing with this is also the fact that we need to have a good um, human resource development to go with various aspects dealing with this. Skilling our people and the Skill India mission launched by the government has been helpful, but we will need a significant retraining of existing labor force, and we will also need to focus on more specific and specialized training and skilling exercises in the future. There's also a question whether what is the assessment on when recessionary environment is likely to be over, and I think it is very difficult to make an assessment at this particular stage. We are in the middle of the initial lockdown announced by the government, and it's very difficult to be able to predict how the recession will progress or how the pandemic will progress. Our effort is to deal with the health situation in a more resolute manner, and where necessary, containment and lockdown approaches have been used. And I think all I can say is that the nation stands together in dealing with this. And under the leadership of the Prime Minister, we're all firmly resolute in facing this as one people. There is another question on opportunities in strengthening relations between India and the US. Thank you, sir. This is a very important question. Our relationship with the US is a very important aspect of our overall trade, business, industry, and strategic partnership that we have. You're aware of the very successful visit of the president in February, and our trade has been very robust. Our defense relationship has been very robust. We have a great deal of strategic understanding on various issues. So I think all that will continue. But in the period ahead, the idea is how best we can enhance, as far as you are concerned, the trade and industry is concerned, how much economic stake, how much we can increase our trade and investments and be able to attract US investments in our economy. That is, I think, very, very important. I believe the desire of multinational companies to diversify their existing value chains and to have their manufacturing in different locations is a plus for us. We have to make ourselves a more attractive destination for investments when such companies seek to diversify. And I think this is where both the government and the business and industry are together focused on this, and this is a common objective. I'm unable, Madam Rajalakshmi Rao. I think there is a technical issue that I'm unable to hear, but I can see. If there are any other questions, I'll be grateful if participants can put it in the chat box, which I can see. But if there are none, I want to thank you for your time spent for listening to me and giving me your valuable feedback. Once again, sorry, I had to be offline. I just was talking separately to find out if there are any further questions. There was one question I was told, which about whether China is now back on after the end of the after they have dealt with the pandemic, and will we lose more market share? I think the issue is I think you should focus on our country and our business and industry. Um, Chinese companies may be online after they may be coming back to the market, but what we need to focus on is how best we value, how best we can make ourselves a better investment destination. And as soon as our lockdown period is over, or even during the lockdown period, how best we can get state governments and district administrations on board so that you can resume your operations while meeting social distance and hygiene norms and all the other regulations that need to be enforced from the point of view of tackling with the pandemic. There's also one question about MSMEs. Yes, MSME sector is very important. This is a focus area for the government. And I think, as I said, the government said they will come out with further measures to help and facilitate our MSMEs. They are also feeling the heat of the various the demand destruction and the lockdown is coming in as a result of the pandemic and dealing with the pandemic. So MSMEs will be an important focus area, and you will hear more about government's efforts to help the MSME sector as a whole. On specific issues about, on EPF and how much can be withdrawn, not withdrawn, it will be very difficult for me to be able to talk about it. But I think those will be issues which the Ministry of Labour and EPFO will talk. I think I can see Jagdeep Ahluwalia also saying something about the Houston Community College and leveraging their skills in skilling. I think that's an excellent initiative, Jagdeep, because I think putting in touch community college networks focused on skilling of paramedical staff and medical professionals with similar institutions in India to build the manpower required for the health sector would be a very good initiative. And I think, as I said, this will be something where the baseline for infrastructure and for human resources will be at a much higher level. I think once we deal with the pandemic and move on, this will be one area which will get a significant attention from governments around the world. I want to thank you all for being here, for your patience and for your time in listening to me. I think I would continue to urge the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce to continue to engage its members, take their views on board, and where required, liaise with the state governments and district administrations, and convey, where required, your suggestions to the empowered group number 6 that deals with this. Thank you very much for your presence here. And thank you, Chamber, and thank you, Madam Rajalakshmi Rao, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.